What's up, Sinisa, Superbad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this, a story that's caused a bit of a shitstorm. ESPN's Stephen A. Smith on women in UFC. I don't want to see women punching each other in the face. Stephen was quoted as saying, "When I think about pugilistic sports, I don't like seeing women involved in that at all. I just don't like it. I wouldn't promote legislating laws to prohibit them from doing so, but I don't want to see women punching each other in the face. I don't want to see women fighting in the octagon," and stuff like that. And I guess Stephen A. Smith didn't realize where he was when he made these comments, that they would be visible to the boxing and mixed martial arts community at large, members of that community being the athletes themselves. That maybe Stephen A. Smith must have thought that he was in his own living room,
in his jammies and slippers.
I think that the repercussions of these statements that Stephen A. Smith made, I think the ramifications of them extend far beyond the outrage it has stirred up by way of social media. Outrage from the athletes themselves. Athletes like Heather Hardy, athletes like Chris Cyborg, Clarissa Shields.
Get a load of this guy.
Several others. And Stephen A. Smith's mistake here is not immediately visible on the surface. It's not so much what he said, but where he said it. Stephen A. Smith, like many of you, is well within his rights to not watch something that he's not interested in, not watch something that he doesn't want to see. He is well within his rights.
If he doesn't want to watch something, then don't watch it.
We can't wag our fingers in Stephen A. Smith's face and try to chastise him for not being more progressive when it comes to women in sport, particular to this conversation, women in pugilistic sports, combat contact sports like mixed martial arts or boxing. We do not have the moral authority to force-feed him these fighters, these fights. We just don't.
That's the truth.
That bit of it, that just boils down to preference.
If he prefers not to watch it, then don't.
That bit of it, that's up to him. It's Stephen A. Smith's decorum when he's making these kinds of comments that he needs to be mindful of. You can't make these kinds of comments as an analyst, a sportscaster of any kind in full view of the public. That's what you can't do.
Not when it's your job to cover athletes.
I think a lot of people affected by this issue would rush to debate and discuss the ideological problem that Stephen A.'s comments address, that, he just doesn't want to see women fighting. I'm sure that many women in sport hear this and almost immediately are offended by it. They don't want to be thought of as delicate flowers that need rescuing. That's perhaps where their minds almost immediately go to as they review these comments from Stephen. That's where their focus is. Here at Ring IQ, we've long supported women in combat sports because, at least for me, it all boils down to entertainment value.
That's it.
The fights are either entertaining or they're not entertaining.
That's it.
And it really is that simple. It's a question of whether or not two girls in a squared circle or the octagon, can they be just as, if not more entertaining than two guys in the octagon or the squared circle? As it happens,
as it turns out, they can.
As it turns out, many of the women's fights that I've seen over the years have been just as, if not more entertaining than some of what you get from the guys. Not all of it. It's just a question of, do women have the same ability to be entertaining fighters, entertaining combatants that men have? And they do have that same ability. So it's not virtue signaling. It's not championing a cause for the sake of championing a cause.
If I didn't think the fights were good, I'd just fucking tell you that.
If I thought that it was all just a novelty act, if I thought that, fights just aren't that good, it's not worth watching, that's what I'd be saying. But that's not the case. The fights are good. The fights are entertaining. There is backstory. There is prestige. There is intrigue. All the same elements that you find in men's boxing that makes it appealing for those who find it appealing. Those are the same elements you find in women's boxing, and some that you don't, because the girls seem to take more risks than the guys do, especially these days.
The fights are more fast-paced as well.
You don't get as many girls going out there taking a minimalist approach to the sport, spending round after round waltzing around each other the way you do with the guys.
You don't.
I mean, just think of that Robert Easter versus Francis Bartholomew fight. That was a fucking stinker. Terrell Gausha versus Erislandy Lara.
Yeah.
Yet another stinker. John Ryder, normally a very exciting guy, but you tell me if you found his last outing
Entertaining.
at all exciting.
Burgundial versus Solis was pretty fucking boring.
Essentially what I'm getting at here is that a fight between two combatants is not automatically made better because it's two guys as opposed to two girls.
Guys can be boring.
It's not automatically made better because it involves men instead of women. I've seen plenty of girl fights that were just as, if not more entertaining than some of what the guys have put out there. That being said, the girls have the same ability to entertain an audience with a boxing match the same way that the guys do. There's no distinction.
They can both put on a show.
And that's a big part of the reason I decided to cover that aspect of the sport, as I noticed that, it wasn't getting the coverage that it deserves, that many of these fights are very entertaining fights. Many of these fighters deserve the praise, deserve the accolades, but they're not getting it, and that's due to a lack of coverage. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the girls got the same ability to entertain a crowd with a fight that the guys do. It's just that for someone like Stephen A. Smith, he'd rather not see that, and that's up to him. That's his prerogative. That boils down to his preferences and whatever they are.
I'm not gonna chastise him for it.
It is his opinion, and he is entitled to it. That being said, having an opinion, one like that, that's not necessarily what Stephen A. Smith fucked up at. Where he fucked up at was letting that opinion be known to the boxing and mixed martial arts community at large. The community that many of these women fighters, women athletes are a part of. When you make those kinds of statements available to those people that have dedicated their lives to their craft, they catch wind of this. How do you imagine they're going to react to it? This is why I stress that what Stephen A. Smith should have been mindful of was his decorum.
ESPN's got to deal with the UFC.
And Top Rank does as well. How do you imagine that the female fighters that fight under the UFC banner or the Top Rank banner, Michaela Mayer, how do you imagine makes them feel that an analyst, not even an athlete, but an analyst,
A mouthpiece.
makes these kinds of comments publicly? This isn't the same thing as having a spirited debate on who's had a better career or who might win a fight. He's not giving the athletes that much respect, that much dignity. In so many words, he's saying that he'd rather not watch them fight. What kind of advertisement do you think that is for women in sport? What kind of advertisement do you think that is for the girls over there in the UFC that has a deal with ESPN? What kind of advertisement do you think that is for Michaela Mayer's fights under the Top Rank banner? What kind of message is Stephen A. Smith sending out there to the boxing and mixed martial arts community at large by making these statements publicly? What kind of message do you think he's sending?
You can feel that way in your living room.
Your average Joe Blow can harbor these same opinions and voice them inconsequentially, because your average Joe Blow, unlike Stephen A. Smith, isn't an analyst, isn't a sportscaster, but Stephen, he is. In many ways, you are addressing ESPN's programming.
Those statements are getting a lot of attention.
And not the good kind. Understand that freedom of speech does not equate to freedom of consequence. You're entitled to your opinions, and you are entitled to voice them, but what happens after that may be out of your control.
Because it doesn't just affect you.
In today's era of snap judgments, moral outrage, and cancel culture, Stephen A. Smith should have been a little bit more mindful of his decorum before making these sentiments known to the boxing and mixed martial arts community at large. How do you think it sounds?
Think before you speak.
Don't just go shooting off at the mouth. You might offend somebody. It just so happens that on the same program where you're featured, they feature the kinds of female fighters that you're telling everyone you don't want to watch.
Why? Because they're girls?
You're such a fucking manly man. You can make those comments from the comfort of your own home in your own living room. You can make those comments rather inconsequentially when you're not an analyst, when you're not a sportscaster. But Stephen A. Smith, he is. And these comments sound quite chauvinistic and quite sexist.
You reap what you sow.
In other news, per a tweet from Jake Donovan, MTK Global claims promotional rights for vacant IBF featherweight title fight between Kid Galahad and Jazza Dickens. MTK submitted $202,500 as the lone bidder. Will have 2 weeks to return signed contracts to the IBF from both fighters. Story to come on Boxing Scene. This might come as a surprise to some, that the lone bidder to put a bid in to host this fight, promotional rights to it, was MTK Global, given that news has been circulating of the PBC offering Kid Galahad some kind of multi-fight deal, some kind of multi-fight arrangement. I gather that
Why didn't the PBC pick up the rights for the fight?
Kid Galahad's value to the PBC is contingent upon Kid Galahad procuring that IBF title. That the door isn't closed for Kid Galahad to end up on PBC Island, to end up on that side of the street. That could still happen.
Just has to win the IBF title first.
And what is a rematch to him and Kid Galahad's initial meeting that took place in 2013, a fight that ended in a TKO stoppage, a 10th round TKO stoppage in favor of Kid Galahad. A lot has happened since then, you know.
It has.
Jazza, he's picked up 2 more losses.
One to Guillermo Rigondeaux and another to Thomas Patrick Ward.
Jazza Dickens currently is on an 8-fight winning streak. He hasn't lost a fight since the Thomas Patrick Ward fight of 2017. Does have a bit of momentum going into this Kid Galahad rematch, though how you guys see it. Do you guys think that Jazza Dickens has actually improved enough that he can maybe win the rematch? I'll leave such judgments up to you. The bottom line here is, MTK Global being the lone bidder for this match, where the vacant IBF title is on the line, doesn't mean that Kid Galahad won't go to the PBC side of things. He still might.
They're not interested in hosting the fight.
They don't care to air it on any of their affiliated networks, but it's what happens after the fight that sets the tone. Kid Galahad picks up that IBF title, it's conceivable that he will go into that multi-fight agreement, that multi-fight engagement with the PBC, as it's the title itself they're likely looking at. It's the title itself they want to put good use to.
That'd give them 3 world champions at 126.
No telling what they'll do if Jazza Dickens, by some off chance, manages to upset Kid Galahad and win the second fight where he was stopped in the first. No telling if the PBC will maintain an interest in getting the IBF champion, whosoever it is, getting that IBF title over to their side of things. No telling if they're going to be interested in doing that if Jazza Dickens wins the fight as opposed to Kid Galahad. I've heard no news of Jazza Dickens being offered anything from the PBC.
Would they sign him if he wins?
That is still a developing story. In other news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now that Bill Haney, the father of Devin Haney, is taking a step back from training his son. Thank you, real Devin Haney, for 14 years of great memories. I'm happy to say I'm officially retired from training fighters. I now look forward to spending more time focusing on business and raising my 11-year-old son, Sean, and my 6-year-old daughter, Arabella. Aww. And, you know, this can be beneficial to Devin. It can. You know, there are lots of father-son relationships, father-son duos in the sport of boxing. Teofimo Lopez, Jr. and Sr.
Those two.
Kenny Porter and Sean Porter. Angel Garcia and Danny Garcia. I mean, the list goes on. There's lots of father-son duos in the sport of boxing. Just ask Mark Kriegel.
Yeah, he can't go a day without bringing that up.
This father and son duo, however, this partnership does appear to have come to an end. Bill Haney is never going to stop being in his son's corner in one way, shape, or form. But as far as the responsibility, the task of preparing Devin Haney for his upcoming fights, that responsibility will be rested on someone else's shoulders. Whose is anybody's guess. We don't know that here. We don't know that right now.
But it could be beneficial.
Do I say that with a fighter like Danny Garcia in mind? To some, Danny Garcia didn't reach his full potential. To some, he plateaued, and they feel that he plateaued because his decorum never changed. There's only so much he was going to get out of his relationship with Angel Garcia as his trainer, him being in his corner. There was only so much that was going to come out of that. I've seen that sentiment expressed many times over the years, that if Danny Garcia wants to take it to the next level as a welterweight, where he's been campaigning for years, if he wants to take it to the next level, he needs to make some changes to his corner. That never happened.
So who knows what could have been.
But in the case of Bill and Devin, the decorum is set to change, and it is set to change very soon. I still view Devin Haney as a slab of clay being waited to be molded into an elite-level fighter and a pound-for-pound sensation. I think that these things are quite possible under the right guidance, the right tutelage.
Believe it or not, it's still early in Devin's career.
Early enough that a change in ambiance, a change to his decorum could have a massive impact on what happens and how he looks moving forward. It all depends on who's in his corner and what are they teaching him. At this point, there are any innumerable number of suggestions that can be made as far as who Devin can add to his team, who he can add to his corner, though that would be largely speculative at this point. We don't know who he's going to
add to his team,
give the reins to. We just don't. But all things considered, if you want my reaction to this, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, this doesn't have to be a bad thing. This can actually spark new growth in Devin Haney. And finally, some good news by way of Mike Kopinger and his sauces. ESPN and Top Rank plan to stage the undisputed 140-pound title tilt between Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez on a different Saturday in May, with Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders slated for May 8th on DAZN. Great news for boxing. Now both fights will receive the proper attention. And I didn't view this as a big deal. I didn't really view this as a big problem. Even if the fights were set to happen on the same day, the average American household can accommodate that situation. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The average American household consists of several televisions, several laptops and tablets and what have you that enable the American boxing fan to view two separate cards simultaneously at the same time. So even if they were going to be happening on the same day, it's nothing that couldn't be worked around. Though this also was a scenario that I entertained. They can simply move one of the fights. And Canelo Alvarez, being who he is to the sport of boxing in this part of the world, it's no surprise to me that it's the Josh Taylor versus Jose Ramirez fight that ended up getting moved. That ultimately, any boxing fan looking to tune into a boxing match that same night would likely still be giving most of their attention to the Canelo Alvarez fight because he commands a large audience. He's the marquee fighter with all of the marquee value. It's not as pivotal for the Taylor versus Ramirez fight to happen on that particular day, that particular week, as it is for Canelo's fight.
It happened that weekend.
You already know that Canelo Alvarez quite specifically fights on certain days of the year, certain times, to accommodate a certain audience. Thus, it's no surprise that he got to save the date where Josh and Jose, they're going to fight at some other point in May. That's fine too. That just means we get two quality matches, two high-quality fights, 2 times in the same month, at least 2 times in the same month, on different dates. I'm okay with that.
No biggie.
I still view the Taylor versus Ramirez fight as the more intriguing fight of the two fights because I think that fight has a greater air of spontaneity to it, and there's more room for something unexpected to happen. But thankfully, I, like everyone else, won't have to choose.
It's an ideal scenario for everybody.